Okay, it's good. We have a good crowd here tonight.
Less
I-
one.
Nicole is not able to make it, and Elaine's gonna try to come on around 7:30.
Okay, cool. So Kathy, you want to get started?
Sure, why don't we get started? I think the purpose of this meeting today is really to go through some for us for future community conversations and how we get, how do we start the discussion? How do we introduce, or how do we get people to talk? I think it always sounds good, but when you break down and try to operationalize it and you get into a room, like where do you begin? I usually begin with some icebreakers or things of that sort. I don't know if that's something you use. I was reading your storytelling, which was interesting, and I was just curious, was that the format you're thinking of us?
So that's what I wanted to offer this evening as one surefire way to do these that's usually going to work. It's not the only way to structure a meeting, clearly, but it is something that has been used successfully. It was the origins of it were a grassroots white Appalachian theater company working with a grassroots Black civil rights theater company doing plays in rural communities in the Deep South where there was a lot of Klan activity going on. So it is explicitly designed for communities where there are divides and where there is fear and where it is really important that you make a space for people to be able to share in a way that they know they're not going to be talked over, they're not going to be interrupted, that they're going to be honored, that there is not going to be that where you create a space as close as possible to perfect equality in that space. And it's been used successfully in community conversations around the country and abroad. And like I said, it's definitely not the only way to do it. But if you are feeling less than comfortable facilitating a kind of, facilitating a discussion in other ways, if this isn't your background, this is a way to do it that often is extremely useful. And it's something that I use on a regular basis in the work that I do. And so that is what I wanted to offer you this evening and then what I wanted to propose, as I think we talked about at the end of last meeting, is that we actually do this together and we experience it, and then we can talk about how to do it and the ways we would use it in the different places that we are working in, that we want to facilitate conversations in, how we would tailor it in different ways, and then end the meeting by talking about the actual meetings that are coming up that we're involved in putting together.
Okay, and you've used this in Connecticut?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
I've used this I actually just used this in Seymour this afternoon.
Oh, okay.
And I have used it in Derby and in Ansonia and Milford and Oxford. So yeah, no, definitely use this in Connecticut, including to talk about housing.
Can I just ask a question before we begin, so I don't forget to ask this? It's really not so much for you, Ben. It has to do with FOI. So I had a long conversation with Kathy Fink this morning, one of the people the land trust people.
In case of emergency ice, or Melissa Purple.
Oh. I was responsible for, inviting the land trust and conservation people to have a community conversation. So we had this long chat, which was very informative in a variety of ways. One of the things she said to me was that she wondered if, and thought perhaps we are obligated to make these meetings, like our other meetings, posted and publicly accessible. Do you happen to know anything about that?
I would think you would need to, because if you have a quorum of committees, you have to make that public. So if there's a quorum of our committee with a quorum of their committee, then it would have to be, a special meeting of both committees, and it would have to be noticed. That's my understanding.
Well, would that apply to the land trust? Because that's a private organization.
Oh, the land trust. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think the issue is more if it's quorum of our committee, you would have to notice it.
What I thought it might have to do with is whether we were actually conducting business, whether anything might come out of it, of whatever it was that we were doing. She said that her experience was, and I can't remember if it was with the Conservation Commission, or I guess it would have had to have been.
Now, this is the
they
land
had
trust.
I was talking to Kathy as a representative of the land trust, but she
Okay.
has broader experience, and she said that they had a property walkthrough with the organization and were called on the carpet because it wasn't posted as publicly accessible. So,
Hmm.
so she recommended that we check
Yeah,
sure that we're within FOI.
yeah, I guess we could just email and just double check.
See,
I'm sorry, is this
so-
Kathy Wick?
Kathy Wick, yeah.
Oh, okay, I thought you said Kathy Fink. I was like, who's?
who's
Kathy
else?
Fink is actually a great old time musician down
Oh,
south.
okay.
But
Well, she's actually works for the State Historic Preservation Office too, so not the same one,
not the same. Yeah.
as far as I know, not the same.
Okay,
Anyway, that was her question.
yeah, well, why don't we, do you wanna ask, the FOI person and,
Is that the town clerk?
what's that?
Is it that the town clerk who's in charge of FOI?
Yeah, I guess you could email it the town clerk. I don't know who you go to for FOIs.
Well, anyway, I just wondered if you happen to have the answer to that question.
Yeah. No, I was thinking, for some reason, I jumped to the conservation committee, and I was saying, well, 2 meetings of the committee. But again, if it's just a couple of us meeting with the land trust and just having a conversation, I don't think so, but I think we just need to ask just to make sure.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine that we really would. As I said, the two things I brought up to her too were the matter of quorum and the matter of a working agenda, which this is, I kept reiterating that the whole point was to listen to them, not so much for us to.
It's actually the agreement. Not even the agreement, what do you call it?
I
Oh,
don't know.
Oh, okay.
Well,
I have
continue.
some
Yeah.
other thoughts and things came out of it, but we'll see if they're appropriate to what Ben is going to suggest to us. If they're better to ask questions like that in context, if there is one.
Okay.
So let me just one question before we jump to Ben's presentation. Were they interested in? But she was interested in having these conversations.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Good. Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, that's big. I think that's that's really important.
Cool. So, yeah, I want to just quickly, I don't know if this is helpful. I know in some of the other towns that are doing this, it's not a formal committee or commission because we're not making decisions. This is all about hosting conversations. And so there hasn't been, I don't think, like in Guilford and Hamden, which are the other 2 towns that are as far along as Woodbridge is right now. I don't think there is that sort of public notice and that stuff because it's not it's a working group of people and organizations looking to have community conversations as opposed to a formal body where decisions are being made on behalf of the town. So if that's helpful at all.
Yeah, I think the lowest common matter of interest is just to be able to identify the sources of information that the body is working from. And the concern would be that we were acquiring information that was not, identified publicly or something like that. I'm not an expert at it all, but that is an issue generally. To make sure that people know who you're talking to, right?
Hey, Ben, just a quick question.
Sure.
Tell me if I get this correctly. So the ideal person that you would probably want to speak with is someone who's leaning against affordable. If someone says, "Hey, I'm for affordable housing," it's the conversation's kind of okay. You know where it's going to go. Are you leaning more towards someone who's or less?
So the answer is we want to talk with as many people as possible, because from all perspectives, because there are a lot of people who would say in abstract, yeah, sure, I'm for affordable housing, but they're not necessarily in the conversation, and they're not necessarily going to show up and be and say that, in a public forum. And so for the people that are interested in having more housing options, then we want to get them involved. And the people that have got some misinformation about it, we want to get that addressed. And the people that have concerns, we want to get those addressed too. So it is everybody. And this is not something I made up, to be clear. Like, this is the school of this is the school of organizing that has made a lot of change in the past 100+ years. And it is, you bring people in not based on what they believe, but based on their commitment to the place where they live. And so if we all agree we want Woodbridge to be a place where we can live and our families can live and remain a vibrant community, and we have disagreements about the ways to get there, that's cool. Let's make space for that conversation, because what
I
has
like
happened.
your answer, by the way.
Say again.
I like your answer. It's
Thank
great.
you. Does that make sense, Donovan?
No, it makes perfect sense. Yeah.
Awesome, and thanks for asking.
You have,
Because it's please, Meredith.
I was saying that the advantage that I had when I was contacting the land trust people is that that they've got a position, and that they've already established it, and that they're really interested in talking about it. When you go to some other organizations in town or groups of people, you have to have some way to explain to them why it's worth their time to come and talk about it. And I think what you did just now, Ben, is certainly a start for that. This is a big issue for our town. We want to make sure that it's done properly, that to preserve the character that forgive me for preserve what we like about our town. You have to not make a mistake like I did with Kathy this morning by telling her to her face, not through our phone. You've got to be kidding. This is not a rural town. She actually thinks Woodbridge is a rural town, and I lost it slightly.
Yep.
Way, but
Of course.
But you have to be sure that you're talking about the same town. But anyway, yeah, I think that's a way of starting the conversation.
Yeah, I love that. We want this to be done right. It's an important issue, and we need everyone's voice, right? So far, it's been a conversation that a lot of people have been left out of, right? You got a lot of vocal people on various sides of the issue that are loud, and not always the most pleasant, I would say. And I honestly believe that that's across the political spectrum. That's not ragging on one side or another, and has kept people out of it because they're like, I don't want to go into a place where I'm going to be yelled at, where I'm going to have my fingers pointed at me, where I am going to not be heard and honored. And that's really the reason why I thought, okay, let's actually learn how to do a story circle, because it's the opposite of that. It's a space that is very intentionally controlled and very intentionally facilitated such that everybody is heard and everybody gets to talk. And speak not from your abstract opinions, but from your own experience. One of the guys I work with in Oxford likes to say, you can disagree with someone's opinion, but you can't disagree with their experience. You can have a different experience, but you can't disagree with their experience. And everybody's got the right to that. And when you make a space where that is honored, you make a space where a lot more people feel safe coming in and sharing, and then from there getting involved. And I will gladly, at a point that is not this, geek out about the history of the Story Circle and its role in civil rights organizing, and Southern labor organizing, and a whole bunch of other stuff, because this is what I do. I won't do that tonight, but just to say, nothing that I'm going to offer you tonight is something that I made up. This is coming out of a long tradition. In fact, I'm right here speaking to you from the coal fields of Southwest Virginia on the Kentucky line. And I'm actually staying right now with some of the people that created this methodology back in the 70s and 80s. So real quick before we start, you said Elaine is going to be coming in a little bit. Is that right, Kathy?
She said she was gonna try to come on around 7:30.
Okay, great. So she'll come on before we start the formal Story Circle, because we don't want to have people coming and going during it, but that's fine. That works great. And Nicole can't make it. I'm sorry to hear that. I think I need to check in with Katie Poole and Peter, because they gotta be here. But okay, great. So we good to get started?
Sure.
All right, let's do it. So if we were doing this live, did everybody, by the way, get the email that I sent with those 2 documents? You don't need to pull them up now. But there's the email that I sent, there's 2 documents on it. One is called On Story Circles, and the other is Story Circle Facilitation. And everything I'm about to say and do is in those documents. So feel free to take notes if you want to, but just know that everything I'm doing is written down in there. So you don't have to remember it. You've got it all to refer to. What we do is we would arrange the chairs in a circle where nothing is in the way. So there's not a table. There is just enough chairs for everybody, so we can really look at each other. Am I right in saying Pua is not going to participate?
Right. She's just the providing.
Recorder. Got it.
Yeah.
Also, in a real Story Circle, it's not a training. Everybody in the room participates. So somebody says, "Oh, can I come watch?" The answer is you can come participate. Because when you have people that are there just observing, watching, it totally changes the space, right? The point is to make a space where people share in ways that they may not feel comfortable sharing any other way. So what I want us to do is imagine that we are all sitting together in a room together in a circle with nothing in the middle, no table, no nothing. And we're sitting in this order. And what that means is when I give the prompts at the end of these instructions, and when Elaine comes in, I'll drop her at the end. When I give the prompt at the end of these instructions, there's going to be silence for however long there needs to be silence. And then anybody here is going to share a personal story, couple minutes, 2-3 minutes long, not going to run a clock. If you go real long, I'll say, hey, finish it up when you can. Going to share a personal story that somehow responds to that prompt. And then we're going to go around in a circle in that order. So it doesn't mean Donovan has to start, but it means that if Mary Dean starts, then it goes to Lou, then to me, then to Kathy, then back to Donovan, then to James. So imagine we're sitting in a circle in that way. And the prompt that I'm going to offer is something that I thought of, but I'm going to ask for feedback on, because you always figure out the prompt in a Story Circle based on the goal. based on what you're looking to get to with that group of people, right? We're not just sitting around sharing stories for the heck of it. We're sitting around sharing stories because we're looking to get to some understanding or get to some end. And thinking about tonight's story circle, the end that I was thinking about, beyond obviously training you all in how to do a story circle, is to build an understanding of what we all bring, why we're all motivated to work on housing, because that'll help us understand each other a little better. If somebody else would suggest a goal to what we want to learn from each other sharing stories tonight, I'm happy to have that conversation too, because coming up with a prompt is actually the hardest part of a story circle. So the prompt I was thinking about, which ruminate on, we'll come back to at the end of these instructions. The prompt I was thinking about was, tell a personal story about a moment when you or someone you care about struggled to make a home. And the reason behind that prompt is, number one, it's personal, right? It takes the issue of housing and it makes it about us. And it also takes out all of the kind of policy rhetoric and says, no, let's talk about what we're really talking about here, which is home, which is everybody needing and wanting to make a home. So that's the prompt I'm thinking about. We can critique it at the end in a few minutes. But so whatever the prompt is, if it's that or something else, and I'll say it again, so don't worry about memorizing it. The prompt, after I say that prompt, there's going to be silence. And then somebody, anybody other than me, the facilitator, is going to break that silence and share a story, again, 2 or 3 minutes long, but we won't run a clock, that somehow responds to that prompt. And when I say share a story, and a personal story, I mean something that actually happened to you, either directly to you or something you know about because you're telling the story about hearing about it from somebody. And it's a story, meaning it's got characters, a setting, a beginning, a middle, and an end. We're not giving speeches, we're not making arguments, we're not sharing talking points, we're not giving opinions. We're sharing a story. And then that first person shares a story, and then we go around the circle to the next person. And that next person has the option to pass, in which case we'll go to the person after that, or to share a story that relates in some way, not only to the prompt, but also to the stories you've heard before you. And that's really important because that's where we get at the most powerful aspect of a story circle, which is through listening to all of our diverse experiences, we come to understand what we actually share, what the story in the middle of the circle might look like. And so if James starts, the story that I'm thinking about is probably not the story that's going to be most relevant after I hear James, Mary Dean, and Lou all share their stories. So whatever story you might be thinking about now after hearing that prompt, I encourage you not to tell that one.
Everyone out.
I encourage you, in fact, to
Head out
maybe even
there.
assume,
Ice.
maybe even assume that you're going to pass until it gets to you. And then you can take a pause, think about it, and either a story will come up or you can pass.
And you,
Yes, sir.
yeah, if you don't have a story, for example, in the example you just gave,
Mhm.
You never struggled with homelessness, and you don't know. You may have known somebody who struggled it, but you're not aware of it. So when it comes to you, do you have to give a personal story, or could you just simply comment on the other stories and give you a reaction? Or do you pass if you don't have a story?
That's a really good question. So we don't want to comment on the other stories during the story circle itself. There is time afterwards. Here's Elaine. Great. There is time afterwards where we will do what we call crosstalk, where we will talk together about the stories we've heard and our reactions to them. Hi, Elaine. So glad you're here.
Hi guys. Sorry I'm late.
No worries. I think we're in the middle of talking about the story circle as a method. So if you read the sheet, you know exactly what I'm saying. And if you didn't, you'll catch on quick.
Okay.
So yeah, there is time afterwards for crosstalk. During the story circle, it's actually really important that we don't comment on other people's stories. You might say, you know, Lou's story made me think of blah, 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 blah. But I'm not going to say like Kathy's story sucked or Maridine's story was great, right? It's so to your question, what I would say, Lou, is probably at some point, you or someone you know struggled to make a home, even if you weren't homeless, right? Struggled to find a place that felt right, struggled to build a community, struggled to belong where you were. And so you can interpret the question in whatever way. And if you don't go first, you're going to hear the stories that come before you. And that's going to bring up stories that's like, oh, what James said actually really clicks with me. And I want to share a story about my experience that either, you know, is similar to what he said, or maybe it's really not, that contradicts what he said. Because does that make sense?
Yes.
Cool. Because that's another thing that happens in a story circle, right? I did story circles in the Kentucky coal fields, and I was like, you know, definitely in the minority, being somebody left of center. So people would share stories about, you know, Democrats, for instance, that like, I wasn't so into, but I was just sitting there and I honored them because that's just their story. And when it came to me, I could tell a story about how Obamacare maybe saved my life. And they had to listen to my story in the same way. The point is that we're not that we're agreeing, but we're honoring each other as neighbors. Does that all make sense?
Yes.
Anybody have any questions? A few last rules. Sorry, Kathy.
I'm just struggling to find the story.
Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. I promise
Yeah.
it'll be much easier when we're actually in it. I promise. Only one person has to be brave enough to start, and then everybody else is in response to what you've heard before you. So just real quick. So as we said, we don't interrupt each other's stories. We don't comment on each other's stories. You know, unless there's an emergency, really try to stay put and just be present with each other. Try to put away things that distract. We really just want to be there with each other. If we're in person, I would say take everything off your lap. You know, put away everything that makes a beep beep. You know, everything like that. So I'm going to put the speaking order again with Elaine there, and they could start anywhere, but it's going to go in that sequence around the circle. Elaine, imagining that we're all sitting together. So you got Kathy on one side of you and Donovan on the other side, and whoever starts, we go in that order around the circle.
And I don't think that everybody has the same presentation on their screen as you do.
Yeah,
Oh,
we
I
may not
know.
have the
That's
same
that's
array.
why I gave you the order. That's why I put the order
Oh, so
on
we're
in the
gonna.
chat.
orders
wait a
in
minute, hold on.
the chat. Oh, we didn't
Do you see
it.
you see it in the chat?
I see something in the chat, yeah. Didn't come up.
So
on
that's the order, precisely for that reason, Maridine. So if you want to, you can reorder the boxes on your screen to make it look that way, but that's totally up to you. Obviously, like I said, in person, we'd all be sitting together. So before we start, let's just think together about that prompt a little bit. Does that get us where we want to go in this conversation? Because if not, we can change it. And this is, by the way, everything I'm doing is modeling what you will do as a facilitator in a group. So you share these rules, you share why they're there, and then we talk about the prompts, just like we're doing right now. And all the steps for this are given on that sheet, Story Circle Facilitation, that I shared with you. So the prompt that I suggested, Elaine, was to tell a personal story about a moment when you or someone you cared about struggled to make a home. And if that doesn't feel so good, then let's think about what other prompt might feel better.
I think Elaine has the perfect story, right, Elaine? You're working with somebody, right?
Yeah, well,
Hold, don't share it yet if you don't mind.
okay.
Yeah.
But does that? But I heard Lou say that may not rub him quite right, and I want to honor that.
Yeah.
I'm happy to go along and listen, and maybe something will prompt, but as I said, I'm not aware of anybody
Yeah.
who have ever cared about who had that. They may have had the problem, but they didn't share it with me.
Right.
Situation.
And when I was talking about how making a home is also broader in terms of belonging to a community, all that, does that feel right or still not really?
That's probably more workable.
Or maybe it's something,
Because it's more amorphous, it makes it less workable, because if you say the word home, it could mean so many things that, the conversation could go off in a lot of different directions.
and that's actually what's beautiful, is if everyone's actually listening to each other and responding, it may go in any number of directions, but it's not gonna go in zillions of directions. There's gonna be.
Okay, if it
through
goes
line.
in a lot of different directions, none of which have anything to do with affordable housing.
I think the first conversation is about getting used to sharing together about something that's a little scary. And actually, if the first conversation has nothing to do with affordable housing policy, actually, that doesn't bother me too much, really, truly, because this is laying the groundwork. And also, of course, in the crosstalk, you can ease into a little bit more pointed conversation about housing, right? When you're facilitating the discussion after the story circle based on what we heard. So you could say, so based on what everybody heard, what we heard, I'm curious, there's talk about, building more housing options in town. What do people think? And I will tell you that you will get a very different conversation after we've been in a space together listening to each other for a while than you would if you just drop that into a group of people who haven't had that experience first. I guarantee you.
In subsequent meetings, or are you saying in the very same meeting where you start out by sharing your stories?
I think the answer to that is feel it out. Some groups will be ready for it at the first meeting. Some groups, your gut might say, wait till subsequent meetings.
Mhm,
It's a really good question.
mhm.
So-
I didn't get a chance to watch you do this with one of our groups.
You're watching me do it right now with you.
Nothing at all. Not at all.
Mhm.
I would like.
And I would be happy. I would be happy to come do it with a group in Woodbridge. Yes, if we plan, I'll be in town. We can talk about this later, but I'll be in town for a week next month. And if we want to set something up, I'd be happy to do that. So maybe it's something like, instead of talking about a home with this group, it's share a personal story about a moment when you connected with somebody you thought you had nothing in common with. If that's the work we're doing, is building these community connections, do we think that might get us closer to where we want to go? And as you're thinking about it, to your question before, Mary Dean, you can say to a group, look, guys, obviously we're here eventually to talk about housing. So let's think about a question that feels right to everybody that, in some way relates to it. And both of those prompts that I just offered do in some way relate to it and do not hit it directly. And that's intentional.
So that the things that really stand out in your memory, regrettably, are the things that made you frightened, are the things that.
Hold on, Mary Dean, are you about to start sharing a story?
Well, this,
Because we can, but I want to officially start the story circle if that's.
no, wait, this is sort of a question.
Okay.
Because when I first thought of what story I would write, I would
Uh-huh.
explain, it would
Sure.
be a story designed to make the rest of the group feel comfortable that my approach to housing and all the complications that's involved in that for the community was sympathetic to those who fear change.
Mhm.
Now that's different from what you were just saying, which is a feeling of disquiet, of fear about being unable to make a place of home for myself. That would be different.
When you struggled, when you or someone so that's why I offered a potential different prompt we could do instead, which is tell a story about a moment when you made a connection with someone you thought you could never connect with. That would be a
That would be a
different
little
prompt.
harder. that would be the kind of thing that would be harder to pull up from my memory because it doesn't. It wasn't a moment that gets kind of seared in your memory like. a
Anybody
bad-
else have, because I want to start in the next couple of minutes, but
Right.
any thoughts on that one prompt versus the other or a different one?
Just sort of zeroing in on the notion of fear as a key to coming up with a story. That it would be easier if it was something that really provoked a sensation rather than
I'm
otherwise.
not a touchy-feely person. And I don't feel comfortable with all of this. I like talking to people,
Mhm.
not in a formal, it just makes me uncomfortable this way. And
Believe it or not,
Sure.
Lou, I'm not a touchy-feely person either. I do this because it works.
yep.
Any thoughts from anybody else? Otherwise, I'm gonna pick one. All right. I want to take from what Mary Dean said about fear, because I think that that's part of what we're doing here is struggling with fear. So I want to propose a prompt. Tell a personal story about a moment when you overcame a fear of interacting with someone. Could be in your work life, personal life, child life, adult life. Tell a personal story about a moment, let's say when you confronted, we don't need to say overcame, when you confronted a fear of interacting with someone.
Many, but I'm trying to think how, like
Mhm.
applying to graduate school and writing your personal statement and wondering if you have anything worthwhile to say about yourself, even though the cognitive part of your brain knows that you do, but it's scary. Any new venture that you put yourself into. I mean, after I retired teaching English at Iris, I was interviewed, I went to observe, and the morning I went to observe, the head teacher said, "Oh, my volunteer didn't show up, you're on." Just jumping into a classroom to do something I had never done before it was terrifying, but I do think, and I'm just trying to think of
Take your time.
examples. I think that almost any time you do something outside of your comfort zone, there's a huge payoff for it if you can hang in.
Elaine,
know.
if I could ask you to share one story.
About not feeling comfortable. What did we pick? Not feeling.
About a moment when you confronted a fear of interacting with someone.
I don't know. I like all people almost all of the time. I don't ever have a fear of interacting with somebody. I might have a fear of not being competent to the task that I've been assigned, but not. of
Elaine,
interacting.
if I'm just going to interrupt as a facilitator. So if no problem, if you don't have a story right now, then we'll start with somebody else and then it'll come around to you. But we
Okay.
want to, it's actually really important for this to work that we're sharing a personal story about a moment. So no problem if you want to step back.
Okay, I'll step back.
So a quick question. So is the story related to housing, affordable housing, or any?
Any,
We're starting with any.
And
obviously you can share a story about affordable housing, but
Oh,
you don't, oftentimes when you start too narrow, then people are like, well, this doesn't affect me, or I'm scared to talk about it.
I guess like Elaine, any new situation, there's a deal of, I want to say not, I guess fear, but once you start, for example, let me think. Made my last few job interviews. Initially, you have that fear, you know, and you try to prepare, but once you get into it, then you start talking about your experience and stuff, and then that fear goes away. I guess that's one example. So facing that fear and overcoming that fear.
So I want to stop us again, because these aren't stories, right? That's saying, and that's like a schematic, right? We're not, that doesn't have characters setting a beginning, a middle, and end. Maybe it's not a good prompt, in which case we can stop it. But it's actually, it's really important. And I'm doing this, I'm interrupting more than I would if I were not doing a training, because it's actually important for all of us, if we're going to facilitate this, to really see the difference between. And so that's cool if that prompt doesn't feel right.
Oh,
But let's figure out
let
what
the
does.
non-touchy-feely person go first. I'll take the debate on this one. I was at a company once that was taken over by another company. This is going back 2012, so a little over 10 years ago. And we had to meet the new boss at the company. We were not everybody was going to get a job. And we were meeting, in my case, I was meeting the general counsel of the company that was taking us over. And it was an uncomfortable situation. My colleagues who had all gone out and met the guy had told me how wonderful it was, and how, he took them to lunch, he introduced them to other people, and they had great conversations. I like to ask a lot of questions, and it was an uncomfortable situation for me, very uncomfortable. And I started asking questions about, where do you see this where do you see the department in later on this year? Where do you see it in 5 years? Questions of that nature. And, I knew I was making a mistake doing it. At least I thought I was. And he wasn't reacting, and he was avoiding my answer. He would go, if I say, what ways would we be different? He would say, in many ways. And he was just being totally evasive. And I was getting actually annoyed, and I just wasn't going to stop asking the question. And I kept asking the question, and it turned out to be a good move, because I didn't get to meet anybody else. He didn't talk. He ended it short. I thought I was out. And then he called me and said, I'm bringing you on my team. I like the fact that you didn't stop asking questions. And, I confronted that fear, and it did work out. It could have just as easily worked out that I was unemployed, and then I'd have a housing story to tell you. That's my story.
Thank you. Sam next, and then Kathy. When I started working in the Kentucky coal fields, my job was to bring communities together to talk. This wasn't about housing, it was about economic development. But it was a lot of the same issues, right? This was coal country right after 8 years of Obama, when a lot of people there blamed him for the decline of the coal industry. There were a lot of Confederate flags up. There's a lot of like rah-rah coal propaganda. Felt very polarized. early on, I met with an ally, a longtime ally of the theater company that I was working with, and who was a, good RFK liberal. And we were having a good conversation. And I said to her, we're looking to work with everybody in the county, regardless of their position on things. And she just looked at me and she said, "You really want to work with everybody?" And I said, "Yes, I do." And she said, "You got to meet my brother." Her brother, Bill, I told him later on, after we knew each other pretty well, was the embodiment of every urban liberal's worst nightmare. It's this 250-pound former strip mine boss who's now a volunteer fire chief, who was a big fan of Ted Cruz, but was perfectly fine supporting Trump after Cruz got out of the primaries. And he was well known for hating the place that I worked and believing that everyone there was a bunch of hippie liberals who were out to destroy his way of life. But I said, "All right, I'll go meet your brother." And I had no idea what the heck I was getting into. And we drove almost a half hour into the middle of nowhere of Kentucky. We pull up to this firehouse. There's all these older guys in there sitting around laughing, older white guys. One of them, I think, had a Confederate flag in front of his truck. And I just started telling jokes. And I was so nervous. I said, "All right, you know what? These guys are going to look at me. They're going to know exactly what I'm about." So I just told them I was a communist Jew from the Northeast. And they started laughing. And then I laughed with them. And then one of them made a vaguely offensive Jewish joke. And, I laughed too. And for the next 2 hours, we just shared stories. And we realized that I am a longtime road tripper, and Bill, the strip miner guy, he was a truck driver, and we liked some of the same old hymns. And what he really wanted to do was start bluegrass concerts at his firehouse. It had nothing to do with, he needed me to help him organize a Trump rally, anything like that. And we became friends and still are. And he's done a ton of scary stuff for him. I took him to the middle of West Baltimore for a community meeting. And to this day, he sees me, he says, "How's my wandering Jew?" And there's just really, it's not even a facade. There's nothing forced about it anymore. It's just like, "Yep, you're my person and I trust you. And I know it's mutual."
Well,
Kathy's next, and then Elaine.
Well, I did have a story similar to Lou in confronting the leadership group, but technically I'm not allowed to talk about it. So as much
I can
as
just say things here are confidential. Obviously, it's being recorded, but
yeah, it's
totally
being
up to you.
recorded. So
Totally up to you.
I just don't trust the source if they ever heard me talk about it. So I won't talk about it, but boy, I'd love to talk about it. Because it would fit right in. But I guess my another situation, it's not necessarily a story, but I'm on the Planning and Zoning Commission, and I am the only woman on the commission, so there's a lot of testosterone going around there, and it's intimidating sometimes to speak up and to make points, and it's just trying to kind of speak up and speak your mind. So there was an issue with this could be like boring with the details. It had to do with a subdivision, and like everybody wanted to go for public hearing. You have the choice of whether or not you have to have it go public hearing, and everybody's like, "Oh yeah, well, it should be heard." And to me, public hearings are, it's like a barrier to doing anything or getting anything done when it has to do with housing or development, because the people that are going to come out of public hearings are people that are going to talk against wanting something. So I'm not a fan of public hearings. And it is, a barrier to, it's just a regulatory barrier to getting anything done. So I was like the only dissenting vote on not having a public hearing. And, I know I was making a statement, but I wasn't really sure if people understood why I was making that statement. I wasn't trying to preclude people from, having a right to come out and speak about something, but we just know that when you have a public hearing, people that are in favor of it are not going to come out and say, hey, this is great. So I don't know if that fits in as a story.
Thank you. Elaine and then Donovan.
Well, your story triggered a memory of me teaching in Richmond, Virginia in 1966 in a very a racist, anti-Semitic environment. And wanting, really wanting to bolt when at the teachers' meeting, before school opened, I realized what the situation was. The problem was that year, I think I was earning $4,000 for the year, and my husband as an intern started out with $3,000. So I couldn't really quit my job. But I decided, the first few times, I grew up in Brooklyn, New York, so I had never felt anti-Semitism.
You go there now.
What?
Let's not interrupt people's stories, please.
Yeah, yes, but anyway, I did a very different approach then, and maybe because I was scared, maybe because when somebody would make an anti-Semitic comment or a racist comment, and it happened all the time, I was so unsettled or traumatized by it that I couldn't think quickly on my feet. What I wanted to do was cry, and that wasn't going to be the smart thing to do. I knew that. I didn't want to feed into anybody's stereotypical thinking. They didn't know I was Jewish. Name Feldman didn't mean anything to them because they didn't know Jewish people. I just decided to bide my time and let people get to know me. Some of them continued. Some of them didn't like me because of my teaching tactics, because I was busy teaching lessons in brotherhood every day, which was the only way I could personally survive in this school. And it wasn't until Passover, so that's usually April, when I brought matzah into school. And of course, everybody said, "What's that? What are you doing? What are you eating? Why?" But by then, I had formed friendships. So I never knew, it was the only way I could do it. Maybe I was too young to think of another way, but at the end of the day, I think that was fairly effective. So they knew me as just a person, not a Jewish person, not a New Yorker, just a person. So I made some good friends that year, actually, which was shocking. So I don't know if that's considered a story. It didn't involve just one person. It involved a group of people. And I forgot until you told your story. Yeah.
Donovan and then James. Okay.
Who's up?
Donovan and then James.
Skip.
Pass Donovan. Got it. James and then Mary Dean.
I've lived a long time and I've had apparently a very charmed life because can't seem to even come close to coming up with a story that's related to that concept. So I'm going to pass.
Also, when we come around again, think about if you have stories that relate to any of the stories you've heard before that you've heard here. So it doesn't need to be directly to the prompt. Mary Dean?
Fair enough.
Well, there's several things about this that you're going to kind of feed together as I think about it, but just go with me on this.
Mhm.
I'm going to tell you a story that's actually terrifying, but I'm not doing it for that reason. I'm doing it because my reaction to that terrifying situation is, I think, tells a lot about me and a lot about fear. So I was a graduate student at Berkeley, and I was living on the west side of town in a cheap neighborhood. And I had the downstairs bedroom, which is in the basement. It was pitch black. And well, it was sort of a garden entrance was outside my bedroom. And it was Saturday night, and it was about 2:00 in the morning. And I suddenly woke up with like every nerve ending was working. I didn't know why at first because the room was pitch black, but I realized there was somebody in that room who shouldn't be. And it was a man who had a knife in his hand and was saying something to me. So, you know, in a situation like that, in any situation where you feel real fear, I think there are a number of sort of classic reactions. You fight,
Freeze.
or you run, or you retreat in some way, right? So I'm lying in my own bed with this guy over me with this knife. So if I didn't have a knife. Fighting was right out. But that wouldn't have been characteristic of me anyway. So I quickly sized up the situation, and acting quickly, I think, is part of all of this kind of reaction that we see to things that are stimulating people negatively. I thought the only weapon I have is my voice. So I just talked that guy's ear off. You wouldn't believe the number of words that came out of my mouth in the next, few minutes was astonishing. Blah, 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 blah. The other thing about my reaction to this was I realized that intuitively there was absolutely no percentage in thinking this person was going to hurt me. It's what, was he a bad person? If he's a bad person, he's going to hurt me. There's nothing I can do about it. And that is another thing that I think is characteristic of a lot of these things that we may want to think about. And that's control and loss of control. What makes you frightened? There are some things that are actually frightening because they're realistically dangerous. And there's some things that are frightening because you don't understand them and you can't control them, or you fear the outcome. You don't know what the outcome's going to be, but you fear the outcome and react accordingly. So my reaction was just to say, this person doesn't want to hurt me. He's here by mistake. And I pulled it off, people. I did. And he apologized. Of course, I was terrified for the next, 16 months. But the takeaway was that I needed control over that situation. I had to get control over that situation as quickly as possible. And that's sort of what Elaine was talking about in her story. She wasn't going to confront the situation because that wasn't going to be either possible or helpful. She was going to find a way to assuming that she could make some headway, find a way to do that, largely with her personality, largely with letting people know that she wasn't frightening herself. Weird. And carrying on, partly through denial, in a sense, I would say, wouldn't you, Elaine? Kind of just
want to say
out and say,
please,
this is
Mary Dean, for now, just share your story, and then this is great discussion to have when we're done.
just talking, Elaine. We like
Thank you. Thank you so much. So
As you can see, I have to come to conclusions too. I can't just tell a story.
it's a skill. So we've been around once and want to now go to the people who passed and offer them another chance to share a story in response to the prompt and or in response to any of the stories that you've heard. Donovan?
Just a response to Mary Dean's story. That's a very scary situation, and I wish I had something like that I could share, but I don't.
No, just any story that any story, any personal story
I'm
that
glad you're okay, Mary Dean. I'm glad it worked out.
Weird.
hold on.
Okay, sorry.
So Donovan, is that a pass? No story? Or
Yes,
you want to take a second?
I don't have one.
James?
It's kind of a reaction to one of the other stories.
Is it, but it's a personal story of your own, is that right?
Oh, it's personal.
All right.
So, it's in law school, and a couple of, friends were walking up the hill, going to class.
We can't hear you.
Did you mute yourself,
James, something happened. We
Okay.
can't hear you.
James? Jim? Can't
Jim.
hear you.
Can't hear you. You just cut out.
Yeah, I think I'm running out of gas.
Now we can hear you.
me okay?
Loud and clear.
All right. So we're talking about stuff and talking about, places that they've been and places
Yep.
that have been scary and places that aren't scary. And someone's saying that, that well, we're in the South, it's, and one of my friends is, it's a black guy. And he goes to, one of my friends says, oh, does it worry you in the South? And he says, the most prejudiced place I've ever lived in my entire life was Boston, Massachusetts. Okay. Because, it's the common ground story. And I thought about that for a while. I said, you know what? This sort of, particularly people around here, and my own sense was that, geez, I hadn't really considered that as a possibility. And, it's kind of like what Milton wrote in Paradise Lost, the mind's its own place. It can make a hell of heaven and a heaven of hell. So, but it opened my eyes because the assumptions that I have, and I think a lot of people I know have who came, from the Northeast and stuff, is that, people in the South are awful and racist and prejudiced and driven snow. And that's not true. We're all who we are, capable of good, capable of bad, capable of thinking well of people, thinking ill of people, being prejudiced, not being prejudiced, overcoming it, not overcoming it. And I think, that was one time that I said, I should assume, I shouldn't make assumptions because oftentimes they're not, well, certainly they're wrong, but they're also not helpful. So that's what Elaine's story reminded me of a little bit.
Donovan, one last chance. If you got a story you want to share.
Some tough acts to follow. Like,
Take your time. Take your time.
really good story. Maybe you can come back to me.
Well, this
Formulate my thoughts.
Well, we've heard from everybody, so we're gonna end the formal story circle here. If something does come up, Donovan, during the crosstalk, obviously feel free to share it. If there was more time, if we didn't have other stuff, I might go around again, because honestly, sometimes the second round going around in a story circle is where the real good stuff comes out. But for now, take a second and feel free to stretch out a little bit. I know for me, listening that intently, especially on Zoom, is kind of an intense physical experience. But what I'd now like to ask us to think about together, and now we can talk in any order, it doesn't need to be going around the circle anymore, is what did we hear that struck us, either because it resonated with us and something that we have experienced, or it really felt different than what we've experienced, or it surprised us in some other way. And then where we're going to get to is thinking about all of our individual stories that we've heard. What's our shared story? What's the story in the middle of the circle where all of our experiences overlap?
Some of it is making assumptions,
Mm,
as Jim brought out. I think we all do that.
mhm.
And any time in my life that I've done that, I've been wrong. You know, I'm wrong. The
I'll
fear,
explain later.
Mary, but Mary, that was so interesting that you were able to trying to think how it transcends all of our stories, but
Mhm.
that you could be that brave. And you actually made an assumption that worked so much in your favor, which was, this person isn't here to hurt me. I find that amazing, really. So that's one thing that occurs to me.
Mhm.
Fear of the unknown.
Thank you. Other folks?
Comment?
Yeah, Lou.
Yeah, you know, and continuing with where Elaine just put us, because I like that. You know, we all did share something. We all had fear of different sorts that had to be confronted. You know, to quote Dylan, which I frequently do, as he said, in the song, it's all right, Mom, only bleeding. He sung, even the president of the United States has to get naked. So we all do have these shared experiences, and they're all, you know, we may have come from different places, but we usually wind up in that one place of fear. Everybody does.
Other folks?
What the difference is, and again, I'm it's not hard, forcing myself to think about what's going on in town here and the kinds of things that we may be hearing in future, is that people have a kind of set, probably it's been studied. There are some predictable reactions to difficult situations, even frightening situations. One of them is to make light of it and hope that works out. One of them is to buy time by telling jokes, or telling jokes to project your humanity and your sense of humor. Another is to project your humanity by saying, I want to hear what you have to say. I want to be part of this conversation, however you do that, physically or verbally. And another one is just to fly off the handle and assume that everything is bad and out to get you. And you've got to be the one who strikes the first blow. Those would be just a few kind of standard reactions to people when they're confronted with challenge.
I saw it.
And how do the stories that we just heard, how did they come into that analysis? What do you take from that?
Well, they illustrate all of those things. Elaine with her, you know, people, Lou doing what he needed to do, even though he thought he was appealing to that person in the real sense that he was expressing what he felt, not what he thought maybe they wanted to hear.
Mhm.
Maybe it was that, and it was that genuineness that put him over the finish line. And Elaine, just people making jokes. Who was making jokes? That was helpful. You were making jokes. Sorry.
No worries.
And other people just making a point of becoming less frightening themselves to the people who were potentially frightening them. So I think each one of these stories is emblematic.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think there is like a common theme about people's fear of losing control. I
Mm,
mean, that is what's playing into why people are so fearful of what housing could do to their town, and there's like pushback because they feel like they're losing control sometimes when there's alternate conversations going on, because there's like a constant calling, like, no, everybody, like, nobody wants affordable housing, or nobody wants housing there, why aren't you listening? When in
Mhm.
fact, that's not the sense of I want to say that's not the sense of most people. They just are too busy to even think about, what's going on in terms of housing. But I think the idea of losing control is a fear that people have, that that something's going to change the look of the town. And I think
Mm.
that's something we need to get across by providing more housing opportunities. It's not going to change, the way Woodbridge looks in any sense. And if anything, it's going to create, a more vibrant community, and how to get that across.
Before I was just gonna, had it not gone this way, had Mary Dean and Kathy not taken it there, of course, after hearing everyone, the next question that I could ask is, so how does this connect to the question of what kind of housing options we want and need in Woodbridge? So if you already made that connection, which is great, but just to say, as a facilitator, if that didn't come up, because holy crap, every single thing people said relates directly to it as far as I'm concerned. And I have more to say about that, but I want to give Jim and Donovan a chance to talk first if they'd like to.
You want to talk more?
If you want to, you unmuted like you had something to say. I mean, don't do me any favors, but if you got something to say, I wanna hear it.
No, I actually had I don't want to break form here, but I actually had a question about, on the theory that some things are, some stories are more true than factual.
Uh-huh.
In terms of telling a story, I mean, are you wedded to saying something that is absolutely true, or can you make a construct about, sort of, I want you to imagine something,
Yeah.
and and move it forward. Take, for instance, hypothetically, you had a town that had 8,387 happy residents living in joy and prosperity, and then a bunch of things happened that, people who work there, couldn't find a place to live, and they went away, and people got old and they went away, and then a lot of people went away, and after a while there was, I don't know, maybe 60% of the people there.
Mhm.
And that meant 60% of those remaining people had to pay all the taxes and do all the other stuff, and find, and things are going to cost more, and the burdens are going to be greater upon them. And how'd you feel about something like that? I mean, I'm just
So
making
to
stuff.
answer your question, for a story circle, it is important that people share personal stories that are true, at least as much as they remember them. Right.
Okay.
But
Okay.
I think what you are offering could be extremely useful in other contexts, right? When we start getting groups together, as we were talking about last time. And having the more analytical conversations. I think what the reason I don't think you want that in a story circle is because part of it is getting to know and learn from and trust each other as neighbors. And so, like hearing
good
that
point.
story in law school, I learned something about you. Right? I learned something about what matters to you. I learned something about the way you talk and interact with people. And I learned something about the way that you handle difficult subjects. And that helps me to know and trust you more. And I think that's a really important part of the story circle. It's a really good question. Thank you.
Follow up on that.
Yeah.
We're all friends here. We know each other well. We've been working together as a committee for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
But when we do our own groups there, we'll be dealing with people we don't know at all. And how much do you push people? We don't know these people. In other words, if Donovan, for example, if you asked the first question, I'd be saying no comment on every single one of them too, because I just had nothing to say. And it's one thing to put pressure here because we're all friends and everything. But if you start doing it in a group, you run the risk of turning people off and getting annoyed at you.
So what I have found, number one, this is why we're starting in communities that have some sense of familiarity with each other, right? So even if you don't know them, they're going to know each other. And I have facilitated story circles with perfect strangers, and it works as long as you're clear about the rules and the expectations. I did not in any way push Donovan to share a story. I just gave him a few opportunities. There was no pressure. There was no cajoling at all.
Because if I was a stranger, I would feel uncomfortable in that situation. And I could have been very just as easily in that, depending on the question. I could have been in the same position.
I'd encourage you, again, I would encourage you to try it.
Yep.
I would really encourage you to trust the process, to use a cliche term, because again, I've done this so many times in so many different communities that have such different levels of familiarity with each other, and it meets people where they're at. Donovan, I'm sorry, I think you were going to say something.
No, I'm just listening. Well, unfortunately, I have a 9 p.m., so I may have to drop in a few minutes.
Okay. And we're going to, in a second, I want to transition, but I want to just say one thing first within the realm of story circle world, which is, wow, we had a prompt that had nothing to do with housing, and yet it had everything to do with housing. The fear that everybody has, including of losing control, as Kathy said, and the way different people deal with that fear. Right? Lou just said, screw it, I'm going to say what's on my mind. I said, I'm going to call myself a communist Jew from the Northeast. Elaine said, no, that didn't feel right. Right? I actually didn't tell people that I was Jewish until it was halfway through the year. The point isn't that anybody's approach is right or wrong there, but these are very different approaches to dealing with difference, right? The assumptions we make. Do you assume that everybody's racist in the South and everybody's not racist in the North? That the person coming into your room is meaning you harm, is not meaning you harm? Like, if we were, which we're not going to do right now, to have a follow-up conversation explicitly about housing, we could now do that entirely on terms that were drawn from this group's own stories and constantly referencing those stories, as opposed to I come in and hand you a bunch of lines, a bunch of sort of pre-written remarks. It allows us to understand so much more about where everyone in that group is at and how we are dealing with all of the issues that underscore housing, and would allow us to have such a deeper conversation about housing and a safer conversation about housing, because now we know something about how we all react to this stuff.
But do you follow up with, after you do storytelling, do you actually get into the topic of housing? I mean, I use it storytelling
Mhm.
as a very long icebreaker in order for
Mhm.
people to get comfortable with each other and then try to dive into the topic.
So that's the question that Elaine asked before. And what I would say is it depends on the group. If I feel like they're ready, I would do it. If I didn't, I would ask, all right, what are we all taking from this? What do we learn here? What's valuable? And are there things we want to explore more? And then encourage a follow-up conversation where it's either in the form of a story circle or it's not. But in that follow-up conversation, we get a little closer to it. We say, can we talk about what it would be like for everybody to feel that they've got a place here and to seriously address, let's talk about. So let's say it didn't feel right with this group to talk about housing, I would say, could we come back and talk more about those fears? Talk more about those fears and those assumptions that we all talked about. And in that meeting, I would drop in housing, right? Starting with the fears and the assumptions, because those are the themes that came out of the story circle, right? They're not themes that I imposed upon a group. And from there, we can absolutely talk about what are assumptions people make about different people coming into the community, or what happens when there are different kinds of housing options, and how do people feel about it, and keeping it really open and letting people share.
Lou, I think you're muted.
No, I was just telling Karen that we haven't eaten dinner, and I
Oh.
do
No.
the cooking. And I
Oh.
have everything on a tray that I said you might as well start it. Because I'm taking
Oh,
like
sorry.
20 minutes starting.
No worries. I was trying to
Yeah,
figure
still-
out if
we could
it's
just
like
put
I
it on
thought Lou was
for
talking to somebody else.
4:25, and then
Yeah. So
20.
Ben, can I ask
yeah,
you a
I want to please, Elaine.
I guess what is the premise around which we're gathering? I mean, how are we gathering these groups?
So
Ostensibly,
that's what I want to talk about right now.
okay.
That's what I want to talk about right now. So let's do a quick check-in about where we're at, and then I want to talk about how we can apply this. And again, if you feel like you can jump right in with a group with saying, all right, what do we think about housing options in town? You don't need to use this. This is something that last time people were expressing concern about. I don't know where to start with fostering a conversation with a group about a challenging topic. And what I will say is that a story circle almost always works. By the end of a story circle, you've got ways in and understandings of how a group moves and how a group understands itself that you can draw on that you didn't to begin with. And so anyways, so hold that thought for a second. Just looking at where we're at in terms of possible meetings. Kathy, anybody, any sense of Steve? He's not back with us tonight.
I don't know if he was actually invited.
Oh,
I just, I think I just dropped the ball on forwarding his email, I think.
got it.
Yeah,
No worries.
yeah, it's,
I think it would be great to follow up with him. Can you follow up with him about the working with the DEI committee?
yes, I could do that. So that's certainly, one committee, and we could talk about that. And
Yep.
I also had, the conversation with Jeanette Glicksman, who's the
Right.
person in charge of human services. And So she is suggesting that we book some time at the library and just get a couple, dates on the calendar, and then she could like promote it through her list, her senior list. I don't know how many people would actually, show up for that, but she could facilitate that. So, in terms of, when you're available, I know most of their meetings for the seniors are during the day, which is not, ideal for me, but I don't know what you said you're gonna be here next month.
Yeah,
I
I'll be here the week of March 20th. So that's great. Let's hold for now. And we can, if we don't talk about it tonight, Kathy, I'm happy to follow up with you
Okay.
and think about what makes the most sense there.
'Cause I do think the storytelling technique, might work well with, if you have a group of, seniors, that might be something that might work well because I'm sure they have wonderful stories.
And what I will tell you is everybody's got stories, including and sometimes especially the people who think they don't. Jim?
Is there a limit to how many people you can have effectively in one of these circles? I was just thinking about that. If you really had a huge group, it would be somewhat unmanageable.
It's a good
think.
question. The usual limit is about 15. If you have more than that, there are a couple of things you can do. One is you can have a more informal story sharing session where there's not an order and people just share and respond one at a time in response to one another, which works in less sensitive environments. So if you got a group of people that you think is like, pretty cool with it, the other thing you can do is have multiple circles. So you can bring in Lou to take half the room and you take the other, for instance. Yeah. I have effectively facilitated a story circle of about 30 people one time, but it took 3 hours. And that was absolutely the right choice for that group of people. And I would say for most groups of people, it is not the right choice.
Okay.
Really good question. Thank you. And Lou, were you able to contact Tom at the library?
Yes, I contacted, actually, I'll start with my bad news first, which doesn't involve Tom. And that is, I spoke to my synagogue, and I rabbi last week, and he didn't want to do it. His first reaction was, "Well, we're in Orange," and I said, "Yes, but members from Woodbridge than any other town."
Right.
And his next reaction was, "Well, people from other towns may want to come," and I said, "Great,
Great.
we can talk. We can listen to their comments too. It's not a problem." But he was pushing back, and in the end, I just said, "Choose my battles." So I got a
Amen.
Yep. And amen is appropriate here because I told you I know people from Connect. We have the head of Connect is a member of my congregation, as well as one of their more active members, Alana Rosenberg and Matt McDermott, who's the head. And I spoke to Alana and said, this is something we're doing. And she's not part of the lawsuit, by the way, if anybody wants to ask that question.
Got it.
And maybe, and she's certainly interested in the question is, do we invite other congregations? Because there are a lot of Woodbridge congregations that are part of Connect. It's congregations, I'm not even sure what the COA. I used to know what the letter stood for, but I can't remember right now. But we could do it that way. I've spoken to her. I'm going to speak to Matt. But what are the suggestions on that? And before we answer that, the third one was Tom, and I did speak to Tom. He's back from Italy. This is a busy season for him because he's a tax accountant, but it's only going to be one night, and he's only going to help facilitate it. So I don't think there's a problem on that. But who would we be doing it for in that group? Would we be doing it for the workers at the library or the community as a whole? I'm assuming more leaning towards the workers at the library because they have a big staff and probably some of them would be interested in living in Woodbridge if possible.
Can I respond?
Absolutely. That was a question, not a statement.
Great. So first of all, with the temple question, I think I love the way you responded. And also I love the way you cut bait with the rabbi. It's like, hey, if people don't want to do this, we're not trying to get people to do things they don't want to do. And I love that Alana is interested. I think it'd be great to do a session with congregants from a bunch of congregations that are part of Connect. I think that would be awesome, and be happy to talk with you, or her or anybody about different ways to facilitate that. I'm sure that, Alana and Matt have their own ways of facilitating stuff. And so, happy to do it in whatever way feels best for that group.
Mhm.
For the library, I love that. What I was thinking when we were talking about the library was do it with like regular patrons, people they know a lot. But I actually love the idea of doing it with the library workers. And that sounds like a great place to start.
Mhm. Okay, I'll talk to Tom on that, and I'll talk to Matt, because I already spoke to Alana, and see what. Alana was so intrigued by it. She's been sending me general articles on affordable housing. They're not, they're not political, they're just good background
great.
articles that she's found in other papers, and that's great.
That's fantastic. And of course, and we can, if we have time tonight, we can talk a little bit about possibilities for facilitating and prompts if you want to go the story circle direction. Also, absolutely happy to follow up and talk more about that. That goes for everybody here. So if you've got a group that wants to do it and you're thinking like, I don't know exactly how to approach this, get in touch. Like, this is exactly what I can help think through. And and we can definitely put one on the calendar for the week of March 20th if to see me come and do it live and in person. So beautiful work. Thank you, Lou. Elaine, any updates on your folks?
Nothing. No, I haven't heard or pursued. We've had house guests, so no, I haven't. Nothing. I think the deal was with the connection from B'nai Jacob, when we were both back home, we would be in touch and she would try to give me some names of people.
Right.
But she's not home and I'm not home, so no.
Fair enough. And also anything on the old, after March 4th, you and Lou and Steve are going to work on the old quarry, right?
Yep. I'm gonna host that.
Cool. Beautiful. And Kathy, any updates from Rotary?
Oh, I have not reached out to him. I apologize.
No worries. Kathy.
But if
This
you're
is the-
gonna be here, March 20th, how much can we book you in for things?
I would say probably one in-person session
Just one?
and then one in-person session, and then we can do a debrief afterwards and talk about planning others. I think is probably the safe thing. Or if we could, because I'm thinking about it's going to be a busy week. But I could do one in-person session. And you were also, you talked with Jeanette. That's great. And senior centers, right. Yeah. With Jeanette knows all those folks. Got it. And hi, Mary Dean. Sorry. Go ahead.
I was going to say, of all the groups that we're talking to, I'm thinking it would be most advantageous to have an outside facilitator for the conservation groups.
Mm-hmm.
The people from that group. They know us, we know them. And having somebody outside, I think, would be helpful. We can blame everything on
Suggesting
you.
that you that we do a gathering with me and the conservation groups?
If you're going to only be able to do one, just for effective. Well, I mean, we'd all like to observe, but
No, and I think that would be. I think we would want to do it with a group where it feels comfortable for everybody to participate, for everybody here to participate.
Yeah.
So that then
there are no observers at the story circle.
Oh, I know you're
Only
gonna. That's what I'm saying, Lou. You're gonna participate when you're there. No observers at the story circle.
No, I think that would work. I mean, especially as we say with that group, they know us, we know them. We could walk in the door. We're going to say, we're learning how to do this, and you're our guinea pigs, and
right,
whatever. And they would.
So what I will tell you is actually that week daytimes look really good. Pretty wide open on Monday and Tuesday, the 20th and the 21st during the day. And I also I'm open on the afternoon of the 23rd at this point. Y'all are getting me before I've made a lot of other plans. So I think that's great. And we can lock it in. If we want to do an evening, it would need to be Thursday night, the 23rd.
Well, should I get back with that invitation to them, you guys? Should I do that?
Is
Ask
there,
them if you like.
Kathy, are there any daytimes that good for you or not really?
It depends. I think that week, so let me just look. I think that week kind of slows down for me. So I could be okay that week.
Do we have it?
Sunday.
Could we set a time now, or do you need, Mary Dean, would you need to contact them and get back to us?
Well, I'd like to give them some times and then have them tell me what.
Great. So what looks good to you all, daytimes Monday and Tuesday, or afternoon Thursday, 20th, 21st, 23rd?
I have to get my calendar. I'll be right back.
Yeah,
worries.
when is the next SCROG, the SCROG meetings usually like the
The
third?
SCROG meeting it's that Wednesday, the 22nd.
Okay,
And I will be leading an all-day training for the Naugatuck Valley groups that day.
okay, all right, so, yeah, I think either day works. For me.
I see Lou and
So do we
Jim.
have
I'm just looking at my calendar. The only thing I really, well, that Friday's no good, but we weren't even talking about that. And I could do any other day except from Monday. I'm tied up until probably about 1 o'clock, but anytime after that I could do.
Got it.
And any of the other days are fine.
Cool. Jim?
The schedule's kind of up in the air during the day. Thursday night I could do.
Thursday night you could do, and during
Yeah,
the
I could do
day-
Thursday night. I don't know. I've got a couple of things that might not proceed, but I have some things that are on the calendar that I don't know I may go forward. So,
Got it.
I just don't
Elaine,
control that.
Sure. Elaine, how about you?
I'm just looking at my calendar. It's that week is fine. Any of those times you mentioned are fine.
Great. So Mary Dean, you want to ask about Monday afternoon or Tuesday or Thursday afternoon or evening?
Tuesday, Wednesday.
Not
PM,
Wednesday.
Not Wednesday.
Can't do
on
Wednesday.
Tuesday, I mean. Monday or Tuesday or Thursday evening.
Mhm.
Yeah, so Monday in the afternoon after 1, or Tuesday, I think pretty much any time during the day, or Thursday in the afternoon or the evening. Seems like those are the times that would likely work.
Now, their expectation, I mean, what I was talking about when I was trying to figure out how to describe this, I don't think I came to the right conclusions. I was representing this as an opportunity to have conversation about the topic.
Mhm.
And I didn't say anything about story circles.
Mhm.
So
And we can do that.
we can do everything, right?
We can do anything. Story circles is one option. I can fully facilitate something that looks nothing like a story circle. But what I'll tell you is, you will see now, knowing about story circles, that I'll be facilitating whatever I facilitate with that in the back of my head. So I probably would.
No,
I
I'm not-
probably would start with something small that's like that would not have all the rules of a story circle laid out, but would be with those principles. Because I think any difficult topic, you want to get at people's experiences going into it. And so, yeah, what we would do, obviously, once we got the day and time set, you and I, Mary Dean, would find 30 minutes to talk before then and really explicitly think about the prompt, and think about the way we would facilitate it. And
What
then,
I have been saying is that this is emphasizing is that this is an opportunity for us to hear from people and to understand what information they need and what we need to work on.
Yep. And again,
Whenever that's done, it should be okay.
great. And that's really important. And this is why, again, what I offered is one way to do it when you're not sure how to do it. When you're not sure how to start with a group. And it can start, directly about housing. Tell a personal story about a moment when you felt that something was happening, when you felt like you weren't sure if you belonged in your community anymore. Tell a personal story about a moment when you struggled to live, to be close to your family. Tell a personal story. There are any number. And again, that's why you ask groups about, does the prompt resonate? So that when Lou says, no, I don't think it does, then you have that feedback loop and you go back. Like you can, if you really got a group that's ready to go for it, man, tell a personal story about a moment when you felt like you had to fight to make Woodbridge the town that you wanted to live in. With the right group, that's an incredible prompt. With the wrong group, it scares the crap out of people. But story circles can be incredibly direct, right? It's really about where the group is and feeling that out as much as you can beforehand, and then filling it out when you get in there.
I just get the sense that I picture this group responding to your last response. That's going to set me over the edge because I know what they're going to say.
I would bet, and Kathy, I don't know them and you do. So
I'm
going to be a little presumptuous for a moment here.
Yeah.
I would bet that at least a couple of them will surprise you.
Well, I hope so.
Because it happens every single time. I'm always shocked by what something I said. I had no idea that that the prompt tonight would have elicited the stories that I did, Mary Dean's being the obvious one, but also it's like, oh my gosh, James, I had that exact experience. Just the racial prejudice in the North versus the South that I felt like, oh my gosh. But it's just, you see the incredible diversity of groups' experience and all these ways that they share that are not obvious. So you do something. In every way I facilitate a meeting, I'm always starting with your experiences, even if it's just your experiences talking about housing, right? Tell a personal story about a moment when you had a breakthrough with somebody talking about housing, right? But it's still asking for that experience. And so again, what I offered to you tonight is a formal story circle, may or may not be what we do with every group.
I do think we have to be strategic on the prompt that we
always.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, it is the most important planning decision is what is the prompt that we use.
Especially if you're in a situation where there's antithesis, that people are antithetic already, or concerned about what they're going to experience. You need to bring them down.
Which is why I usually start with a prompt that is more general. Because you can always dial up the specificity in the crosstalk to say, all right, what does that have to do with housing? But if they start way up here, it's hard to bring them down.
Well, I'd love the idea, if it would work, of asking people to give an example of housing issues in Woodbridge that caused them concern, that there were personal experiences. That's not as personal. It doesn't, I hope it does not inspire the same kind of flight or fight reaction that would make it a story that they kind of remember. But we get a lot of
personal story about a moment when you have felt concerned about housing in Woodbridge.
I could answer that question. That was the one I was going to tell you first until I got the fear notion that was sort of what we were talking about also, ultimately.
Yeah.
Because I lived in 2 houses in Woodbridge, which were behind which developments were created during the time that I lived in the homes. And I know how that feels. You didn't enjoy watching those trees come down and all that stuff.
I think my only concern with that prompt is that people might not share stories and they would just share opinions. That would be my concern about that prompt.
Well, I wasn't suggesting it necessarily as a prompt. I was just suggesting it as what came to my mind.
Ah.
Because and the reason for doing that would, under those circumstances, would be to project myself as an individual who understood some of
Got it.
counter
Got it.
sense,
Whereas for Connect,
unliberable sense,
Hmm.
the reactions that people have or the fears that they have.
That makes lots of sense. And oh, here's Nicole coming in for the last 10 minutes. Awesome.
Oh,
Hey,
she's
Nicole.
thinking
Better late than never.
Glad you're here.
Sorry, I was running another meeting, so I wanted to hop on. How are you
It
guys?
happens. We're glad you're here.
Sorry. That's quite the close-up. I need to back up a little. Okay.
No, you're good. I mean, look at me. I'm like, "Ah." So this is great. And this conversation, Nicole, we're talking about story sharing prompts and other ways that we would facilitate these meetings, and that they got to be intentionally and carefully chosen, depending on the group of people we're talking with. And they have convinced me we're going to do a meeting with the preservation people the week of March 20th, which is the next time I'll be in town. And we're all going to go to it and I'll participate. And then we'll go afterwards, ideally to a bar someplace, and we'll debrief. And we'll talk about how it went, and we'll talk about lessons for other meetings that you got coming up. And that I'm always there to talk, like Mary Dean and I are going to talk before that preservation meeting about planning a prompt for that and planning a structure for that. But that always, whenever possible, whether we're doing a formal story circle or not, start with people's experiences and start with people listening to each other. So I'll almost always, in a first meeting, something like this, when I think there's going to be some of that tension, start with a question that gets everybody just sharing a personal experience in a circle. And sometimes that'll take an hour, sometimes that'll take 15 minutes, but I'm always going to do it because it just humanizes the conversation that follows.
Yep.
I'm going to have to jump in a minute because
Yep.
not only am I hungry, but my food is going to be dried out.
Oh, we don't want that.
No, I don't want that.
I think
but,
we're about ready to go.
yeah, but I was going to just say one thing on when we do the one with the religious people who connect. Actually, your first prompt would work very well because many of those people would have stories, not to themselves the story, but they've heard from others, and that would be a good way to start.
Absolutely. And of course, one could argue the struggle to make a home is the Jewish experience.
Well, this would be all religion.
That's for sure.
Wait, I'm sorry, Lou, say that again.
Connect is not just.
That's true. Excuse me. That is
all
very
congregations in the area, in the state,
I had Jewish
vicinity,
congregations
so-
in my head, but yes, you're totally right.
Well, there'll be a number of churches. There'll be a number.
I love it. And I really think that just like, people that didn't have a response immediately, when they heard other people's stories, they responded, that would be the same. Some people will say, well, I never had, but then you hear another story. Oh, I get it. I can connect to that. So that's fantastic. Question before we go, because I know it's a long meeting and probably Lou is not the only one ready to get off. Do we want to schedule another group meeting at this time? Or do we want to plan to just follow up about the individual meetings, and Kathy can be the hub and I'll follow up with her, and I'll follow up with you all as relevant, and then we know that we'll meet up that week of the 20th? Or do we want to put another meeting on the calendar where we're checking in between now and then? I'm good either way.
I don't know, I tend to think to see what happens after our trial run, having this conversation with our friendly conservation groups.
Okay. So let's just definitely plan to, number one, be in touch as stuff gets scheduled. Be in touch with Kathy is fine, and then Kathy and I can check in. And if you want to talk, like for instance, like I said, Lou, if you or Alana or Matt want to talk together about facilitation, absolutely happy to do that. Also, do not want to step on your toes. So if you feel like you've got it, don't feel like you got to run it by the committee, aka me. And same with anybody that's setting these things up.
I just a
Yeah.
question, when we do have this, our first meeting, is a goal is to plan the next meeting with this group?
See what comes out of it. I think usually the answer is yes. If there is energy, then we're going to want to meet again. I mean, this is what Steve said last time, right? Steve was saying, after you meet once, you want to immediately start, bringing the groups together. And I think that depends on the group. I think you're going to feel that out about whether there is, whether they're like, yep, we want to start talking with other people about it. Great. Or, ooh, we had a breakthrough. We want to meet again and see if we can get deeper with each other. It's another one of those things that really depends on the group.
Okay.
So the basic structure of these meetings, I forget if I said this to you all. I don't think I did actually. This is something I thought about recently. However you facilitate these meetings, it has three kind of basic parts. One is sharing experiences. Then number two is presenting information, whatever information you want to share, which in some groups could be, wow, they're really ready to learn a lot about housing. And another group is, no, maybe the information is just, here is the way that we're talking about, fear, and responding to it and gaining that together. And then the third is some planning, some kind of next step, right? That's the kind of basic schematic for all these meetings. And the next step could be, we're going to meet again ourselves. The next step could be, we're going to meet again and everybody bring in one person that wasn't here tonight, but needs to be. The next step could be, we're ready to meet, with two other groups once they've had their meetings, and they're ready to meet with us. So it's really, it's gauging where each group is, and they're going to be in different places and going to have different needs.
Characterize our goal for these meetings. Is our goal to get more people to do what? Let's say, that would be
To
a
get
goal?
more
Is that-
people to feel comfortable talking with other people in town about challenging things that will eventually include housing.
Okay, got that.
That's the way I would put it.
Mhm.
So the first meeting is with conservation?
Well, that's the first, that's a meeting that I'm going to be present for the week of the 20th. Mary Dean is going to put it together. That does not in any way stop you from putting more meetings together beforehand, and happy to chat about facilitation as you do it.
I don't know necessarily conservation, Mary. I think it's the land trust, right?
Oh, yeah, I just meant the conservationists as a group. In fact, they would probably, we would extend this invitation to the other two land use groups in town too. Not including the Conservation Commission, maybe them too. But we have the Parks Association and we have what's the other one?
We have Woodbridge Land Trust and then the Woodbridge Park
Trust.
Association.
Parks Association, just two? I thought we had they changed their name. That's how
Right, they used to be the Woodbridge
So
Conservation.
we have two private and one town conservation related bodies. And probably all three of them would be invited.
Fair enough.
I'm gonna have to jump.
Yeah,
now.
we're gonna all jump right now.
I want to see you jump, Louis.
We're all
I
gonna
could
jump
jump
right
these
now.
days,
I would
Jim.
say, please, if you're planning a meeting, at least let Kathy know about it so that we have somebody that's a hub of information for everybody. And Kathy can get in touch with me, or you can get in touch with me directly. If you want to talk more, I put my phone number and email is in every email I send. And here it is again, in the chat. So feel free to use it. Lou, have a wonderful dinner. Everyone
you.
else,
Thank
have
you.
a wonderful evening. I'm going to go have a wonderful drink and take care. Be
All right,
well.
bye.
Guys,
I,
Oh, by the way, guys,
Elaine,
do you
feel
want,
better.
I got a copy from.
What'd you say, Mary
got a
Dean?
I was going to say to everyone, I got a copy of the lawsuit. To see what OCA says about this town. I haven't seen it yet. Do you want me, does anybody want me to send it to you? I got it from
That's
Kathy.
the original. I've seen the lawsuit, but,
Yeah,
yep.
You know, lawsuit.
I haven't seen our answer, but I should do, that's gonna be public also, so,
Okay, well, if everybody's ahead of me on this,
thank
do you,
you.
you have the responses, or, I mean, I have the lawsuit, but do you have the different responses?
I'd like to see the responses.
Hmm.
I can ask for about it, but they're,
Okay.
they're still being pretty close to the chest about that, aren't they? No, do they, have they published?
Well, I guess,
responses?
yeah, there's a way of looking it up online. I
Okay.
just have-
But just, I hadn't.
Okay, thank you.
All right,
Take care, everybody. Thank you, Mary Dean. Thank you, everybody.
Good night.
take care.
Bye.
Bye.